In 2008, a podcast was created with one goal: to bring Bat fans around the world news related to movies, comics, video games, television, merchandise, and so much more. And now, the Batman Universe podcast has returned. Welcome to the Batman Universe podcast. I'm Dustin, and first you're probably thinking to yourself, wait, that's that guy who was from that other podcast. And I'd say, yes, you're absolutely right. I previously was on the Batman Universe comic podcast, and if you've been around long enough, you probably remember that I also used to host a podcast called the Batman Universe podcast, which, of course, focused on movies, television, video games, merchandise, as well as comics at the very beginning. And you may be thinking to yourself, wait, isn't there already a comic podcast? Aren't there already multiple other podcasts as part of the Batman podcast, as part of the Batman Universe podcast network? And I'd say, yes, you are absolutely right. But the thing is, the Batman Universe podcast was always intended to be the flagship podcast for the site, as it was the original one. So before we get into a lot of details about what to expect and what's coming, Let's take a little trip back. So back in 2008, The Dark Knight was going to be releasing, and it was actually 2007, Christmas of 2007. I received an iPod for Christmas, and at the time I had gotten really into setting the thing up and came across the little slot on there that said podcast. And I was super interested in seeing what exactly podcasts were. After a quick search and realizing what they were, I thought it was a really cool thing. I was really into Batman, and I wanted to find out if there was any Batman podcasts out there. And while there was some Batman podcasts that had serialized fiction work, there was one podcast that released in September of 2007. They produced about 6 episodes, and if I remember correctly, it was a single gentleman who just had a podcast talking about news related to The Dark Knight coming out in 2008. At the time, the viral marketing campaign was in full swing for The Dark Knight, and there was a lot of hype around the movie. And the 6 episodes that podcast released, I was super interested. They were only about 20 to 45 minutes long, and every single one of them was a great episode. It boosted my fandom, and I wanted more. Unfortunately, the podcast ended, or just kind of fell off and didn't really move forward in any way, shape, or form. So here I am a couple months after they posted their final episode, and I was trying to figure out a way to find more information about Batman. There was plenty of fan sites out there like Batman on Film or Batman YTB, and there was lots of online forums that you could discuss things about Batman. But when it came to podcasts, there really wasn't anything out there other than this one podcast that had just a few episodes that reported the news. So I took it upon myself, because I had the free time at the time, to start a podcast. That podcast obviously is this one, the Batman Universe podcast. It was just myself, and my entire intention behind the podcast was to report news related to movies, television, video games, merchandise, and the comics. And that's exactly what I did. January of 2008, we released the very first episode. And over the next few months, we brought on some additional co-hosts. We had conversations related to the upcoming Dark Knight film coming out. And we had lots of different things to talk about. Over the rest of the year, the film came out, and the comics were in full swing. There was a lot of really good things happening within the Bat books. And we decided to start a spin-off podcast called the Batman Universe Comic Podcast. At the same time, we launched a website to host both podcasts, and then also try to have some other content available as well. Now, over the course of a long period of time, these podcasts kind of went hand in hand, and there was a lot of different co-hosts that came and went. Towards the end of my run on the podcast, which was in 2014, Ed, Melinda, and John were with me on a periodic basis. We tried to stay every 2 weeks, but between the split schedule with the comic podcast that I was also on and the normal podcast, there really wasn't a whole lot of free time for me at the time. In 2010, I moved from Kansas up to the Chicago area, and I also had my first child. So that already added a little bit more stress into my life. In addition to that, having the website kind of grow and get bigger, and we started reviewing comics and we started reporting news ourselves, it became a much bigger task to take care of and manage everything. In 2014, I had my second child, my daughter, and things were still a little bit difficult. But before my daughter actually came, I realized there really wasn't going to be a whole lot of opportunities for me to manage both of these podcasts. So in 2014, I put the show on hiatus, and I basically said, unfortunately, it's very difficult to run these. Well, we had three gentlemen, Brian, Jamie, and Andy, come along, and they took over the Batman Universe podcast for a pretty long stint. They took over the show in 2014, and basically they ran the show all the way through 2016. Right after Suicide Squad came out in theaters was some of their last episodes that they had. It was great for the podcast. The podcast had a set group of hosts. Brian had to leave, unfortunately, around episode number 114. But Jamie and Andy, they kept going for a long period of time, for another year and a half after Brian had to leave due to work reasons. So the podcast kind of that was it. It kind of just ended. And unfortunately, because they didn't have the time to manage to do the show, and I didn't have the time to do the show just kind of was there. And the feed existed. It still existed, but we didn't have any new episodes. Along this entire time frame of 2016, I was still managing the Batman Universe comic podcast. And while I definitely wanted to talk about movies and television and video games, because there was a lot of stuff to talk about during that time frame, it just was impossible for me to manage both podcasts. There's no way that I could take on the task of managing both of the podcasts. So unfortunately, the Batman Universe podcast kind of just sat dormant for a long period of time. That is until now, because now I'm pleased to announce that the Batman Universe podcast is officially returning. We are returning, I guess, in some ways with a vengeance, because to be honest, I've wanted to start this back up for the last 2-3 years, but there's just been a slew of different things happening in my personal life that have kept me from doing this. And in addition to the fact that the website has grown leaps and bounds over the past few years, and we have a number of other podcasts that we have as well, some of which are reporting some of the same exact content that we're going to end up reporting here. The catch, of course, is that I've never not wanted to talk about Batman stuff. I've always wanted to keep talking about Batman stuff, whether it be the comics, whether it be the movies, whether it be the television shows, or whether it be just some of the merchandise that's coming out. This is stuff that I've always been super interested in, and has become extremely difficult for me to not talk about it outside of a podcast, because I just don't have a lot of people personally in my life that I can talk to outside of the awesome fans that we have on our Discord and the staff members that work on the site. I don't have anybody to really talk about this stuff that really care about it as much as I do. And I know for a fact that there are people out there in the world that are in the exact same boat, outside of being able to connect with other fans that aren't necessarily immediately face to face. This is what you are looking for. And I'm hoping with the return of the Batman Universe podcast, this gives you another avenue to share your fandom and to get more involved. Because one of the things I want to do a lot different this time around with the Batman Universe podcast is have a lot more interaction with the fans. I want to have different bits that we do that interact with the fans. I want to liven it up. I've never once ever thought to myself that I'm an amazing podcast host. I've just been there, and I've done it. I have the experience. I've been doing this for a long time. While I was doing the Batman Universe comic podcast up until a few years ago, and right after that, I was doing another podcast not related to Batman as well. So I've always been in the realm of podcasting. I just have never once said that I have an amazing personality and I need to be the person who everyone focuses on. So one of the things that has always been pressed upon me by my mentors and things like that is if you're not if you don't have a great personality or you're not the greatest person at doing something, surround yourself with people who are better or, can offer something that you can't. So I'm pleased to announce that I have a group of hosts that are going to be joining me. Some are going to be joining me more often than some, but a lot of them are going to be interacting with me on a weekly or bi-weekly basis when we're talking about different things. This podcast is not intended to be a specific set schedule. We are going to be trying to release our episodes on Mondays, so that way after the weekend you have a nice thing to come back to, so that way Monday mornings you have something to listen to. I've always thought that Mondays are a great day to listen to updates from the week before, especially if you're not reading all of the articles on a consistent basis. But we're not necessarily going to have an episode every single week. We're not necessarily going to have an episode every 2 weeks. We're going to aim for at least one episode per month on slower months, but we are definitely going to be trying to put out episodes as frequently as possible. You can expect these episodes to be anywhere from 20 minutes to an hour long, depending on what the different things that we have to talk about. Another one of the things that I definitely wanted to change up is the format. So in the past, we've done a very, very structured format where we basically just run down the news that you'll find on the website. What I've learned from listening to other podcasts, as well as obviously managing our podcast, is that that's not exactly always the best thing to do when it comes to podcasting, because you could read this stuff yourself. You could read the articles on our website. We report all of this news, so there's no reason you need to listen to us. You are coming here to listen to our takes and our views on these different topics, and that's what we're going to do. So we're going to be focusing on some of the bigger news. We might not get to every big news topic every single week, and that's what will make us have more episodes more frequently. Because in 1 week, especially this week, because I'm sure you're trying to figure out why specifically right this second is the time we're bringing this back, and I'll get to that in a second. But some weeks there's a lot of news that comes out that isn't going to always fit inside of a nice, tidy 1 hour episode. And we don't want to limit ourselves by only having one episode and for an entire week's worth of news. We might have to split some of the stuff up. So we might hit some of the hot topics, and then we might come back to some of the news that we want to discuss but isn't as important, or isn't as, I guess the biggest way to put it would be the news that isn't in demand. So we might come back to that stuff in a few weeks if necessary. But the thing is, that's what we're planning on doing. Now you may be saying, to go back to what I was saying earlier, why now? Why are we doing this now? Well, one of the things we wanted to do, specifically I wanted to do, was I had every intention of bringing the show back in 2020, specifically because the Batman was going to be releasing. I was trying to time the return of this podcast with a new Batman solo film. And unfortunately, that didn't happen because the Batman got delayed to late 2020 to 2021. Now it's in 2022. And because of all of those changes, that put a hiccup in my return plans. Obviously, we've already gotten one trailer for Matt Reeves' Batman film that's coming out next year. That was last year at DC Fandom. But guess what? Right around the corner is DC Fandom 2021, and that is already promising to have a new trailer for the Batman. And I personally believe we're going to start seeing a lot more stuff related to the film coming in the very near future. So a couple months back, I put together a group of staff from the site that I wanted to bring on to the show. We discussed it, and we are wanting to do this to really talk about this stuff. Not only just the Batman film, because obviously that's the big headline stuff, but there's all kinds of stuff happening in the world of comics. There's all kinds of stuff happening with there's two video games that are coming out in the next couple of years. They're going to be focusing heavily on Batman characters. There's also obviously television shows that are consistently releasing new episodes all the time, on top of a slew of merchandise that is constantly releasing as well. So that all being said, I just wanted to get on here and do a quick episode because I should have done this, and we should have done this a little while ago, but I wanted to get this put together specifically so that we can get new episodes flowing out to you guys as quickly as possible. So, going forward, while our previous episodes have all been named a specific episode number, we're not going to be doing that in the future. In the future, we're going to be focusing on whatever the topic is that we're discussing. That's going to be our episode titles, and we're going to have a group of people that I'm really looking forward to discussing things with, and I hope you guys are looking forward to hearing their thoughts, hearing my thoughts, and you guys can interact with us in the near future about the variety of different things that is happening within the Batman universe. As always, if you are so inclined, we are always looking for support because, let's be honest, we have to pay some bills every once in a while. That being said, we have a bunch of different avenues for you to support the show and the website, and I encourage you to do so. Anywhere on the website, there is a sidebar, and there's also something on the homepage that says support. Show your support for TBU. The biggest way you could show support is becoming a patron on Patreon. That is the easiest way, and you actually get certain perks that you can find on our Patreon thing. You can also make a one-time contribution on PayPal, and there's a ton of different stores online, including Amazon and Comixology and Entertainment Earth, websites that you probably are frequently going to and purchasing things from if you are a Bat fan. By clicking those links, you are supporting us because those are all affiliate links that we get a tiny amount of commission on every time you click those links. The last, but probably the most important way that you can support us is by donating your time and skills. Now, I know there's always a lot of focus on money, and I will say money is great to help pay the bills, to help pay all the variety of different things that we have to pay for to make everything run smoothly. But more importantly, and I have to stress this, the volunteering your time and skills is probably the most important way you can help us. Our website would not be the way it is if we didn't have dedicated people dedicating their time and their skills to writing articles, writing news, writing reviews, putting together podcasts. We would not be around all these years later. I mean, it's been over 13 years. It's almost 14 years since we first came around. We would not still be here if it wasn't for all of the dedicated people who have helped dedicate their time by volunteering their time and their skills to make TBU successful. So, one, thank you to everyone, past and present, who has ever helped us out, and we greatly appreciate that, including our current staff that we have as well. So if you are so inclined, we are always looking for volunteers. Get in touch with us. You can send us an email at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net. And obviously, all the other ways you can support us by sharing our show and our articles that we have on the website on all social media platforms, as well as giving us reviews for this podcast as well. That is always greatly appreciated. So, the next time you hear from us, we will be having a brand new episode, and it will be all about some of the news that is coming from DC fandom. I'm looking forward to discussing a lot of this stuff. I know some of my co-hosts are looking forward to bring back the TBU podcast, and I hope you guys are looking forward to it too. With all of that being said, thank you so much for taking a listen to this brief announcement, and hopefully you will join us in the near future when we have more episodes of the Batman Universe podcast. If you have any comments, questions, concerns, or things you'd like us to do in future episodes, please share those comments by sending us an email at tbu@thebatmanuniverse.net or join our Discord and leave those comments in the TBU podcast section. Thank you so much for listening, and we can't wait to bring you more episodes.